how to do this or know how to do that. That you may, again, I'll pick on Craig here, but if you're volunteering somewhere, if people don't know you were once a lawyer, they may never think to tap into that knowledge and experience you had in that role, because you're now doing something completely different when you're volunteering. But so we're trying to get people to broaden that and say, okay, what do I need to know? Where might I get it? And how do you not act absent knowledge that you could bring in for consideration if you thought about it?
Which is really fascinating.
You know who, if you want an example of a person who came into a completely different culture, came actually from Silicon Valley to HHS, and got all the meat out of this nut, cracked the nut, got all the meat out really, really, really fast, and at the same time was extremely well liked by the time he became the federal chief technology officer, and that's Todd Park. And the reason I'm thinking of Todd is when the Excellence in Government Fellows graduation that year, I think after he became the CTO and moved from HHS to the White House, he got a standing ovation by everybody in the room at the Hilton, which was like 500 people. That was really unusual. The reason why everybody stood up and clapped is because Todd told the story of how he came into HHS. So he was sort of the fixer, the guy that was brought over from Silicon Valley to fix some tech stuff at HHS. And the very first thing he did was convene all of the IT specialists, IT personnel at HHS, which is a lot of people, and they're distributed to a lot of different components of the agency. And he got them all together and he said, listen, I don't know anything about this environment. I know a lot about tech, but I don't know much about HHS. And I don't know much about your tech. But you guys have been here. You know everything. So tell me, what do I need to know? And the fact that he did that first, the guy had a good relationship with all of the tech people who all wanted to help him. They all told him things. He's smart enough to filter out the things that weren't helpful. But by the time he was tapped by the White House, he had this reputation of being a really smart guy who could really work with feds and get their respect. And he knew those first three boxes. And that happened fairly.
Drop off. I've got another meeting, but this is fascinating.
Okay, well,
sorry I can't stay longer.
Glad you could come. We'll have the recording up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
All right, bye-bye.
Yeah, Kitty, that's a great story of somebody who understood there was this unknown known box down in the lower right. You got to figure out how do I tap into that? How do I open that box up and find out what's in there? And it's asking questions. It's admitting ignorance, which is not easy for some people. And which to me is a strength, but often people are afraid to do that. My model for this is Thad Allen, who I got to spend a fair amount of time with. He was somebody who was always saying, so what am I missing? Who else should be here? Asking those kind of questions. Even he get 4 stars on his shoulder, he's still acting that way. And that was, again, it keeps you from being surprised. You look at I've written a couple articles now on the Boeing scandal. There's stuff there that if they didn't know it, they sure could have known it or should have known it in terms of what was going wrong. And I think as the investigatory process unfolds, they'll find out that it may have been some willful unknowing of knowns. But the ability of both putting good and bad news to work its way up through the chain of command up to the senior people so you actually know what you need to know is it's a real skill to bring that out and to open up those lines of communication so people are feel comfortable surfacing those difficult truths.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so you said comfortable, so you also have that sort of talks to the role of psychological safety. And then I guess I'm also wondering then, are the Thad Allens or the other people who really seem to have mastered driving to the known, are they also reading things or thinking about things like black swans and reading the takes of some people on how you do abstract and imagine what may happen?
Yeah,
So is that how they're attacking that fourth quadrant, or what are they doing?
yeah, I think they. I hate to generalize, but I think they are. I think they're always thinking of, sort of what's next. You talk about people who are, you talk to people who are thinking. Sometimes they seem crazy, but they're saying, okay, what if this happened? Or look at these different factors that could be lining up. What do we do if? They are doing that to very forward thinking. But I also think, again, one of the exercises I've done in organizations that is very illuminating is you take people in the middle of the organization and you say, what keeps you awake at night?
Yeah.
And there is stuff that people at the top are not thinking about. And some they are. I mean, some obvious risks and some things that are well known and are commonly held. But I was at that same energy company just a few years ago when the political situation was a bit different than it is now. And I was working with the Marine division that did oil exploration and mapping of the sea bottom. And one of the people in the room said, radicalized employee takes one of our boats and drives it into a rig. And people just said, oh shit. They thought about external threats and they're worried about terrorists and things attacking them, but they had not at that point thought of an internal threat, a radicalized employee who might do something nasty. And that then, started the whole process because they have a very, very diverse workforce. They're all around the world, lots of frontline workers, lots of potential for that. And so they get much more aggressive about figuring, okay, how do we spot that kind of threat early on? How do we get ready for that? And so I think in any organization, one of the resources I like on this is there's it's a consulting firm called True Point, but the guy who did the work was Michael Beer from Harvard Business School, retired now. They wrote a great article on, it's called How to Have an Honest Conversation About Your Strategy. And what they talk about there is a formalized process of information gathering from the front lines to get it up so that it is done in a way that it makes it impossible for those at the top to ignore what they want to ignore. They may not like everything they hear, they may like some of it, but it opens up that flow of information. And they've got a process of how you do a series of interviews and who does them that helps open up that pipeline. Because their hypothesis, and I agree with it, is that most of what's wrong in your organization, people inside the organization, they know what it is. They probably know most of the solutions. They're waiting for permission and political cover in order to do something about it. So you might as well, before you go hire the external consultants, figure out how to get tapped into all that knowledge and insight inside the building already and put it to use. You're on mute, Kitty.
I know I had to riffle papers and I didn't want to riffle over you. So that's how to have an honest conversation about your strategy.
Yeah, I can send you a link to the article. It's in Harvard Business Review.
Okay, I'll put it in the recap because I think, well, I think all of this is going to be really interesting to the Senior Fellows and Friends Network and our supporters. I'm wondering, so we've talked about sort of leader characteristics, the people who are leading responses to disaster type situations. And we've talked about how those people can be, and their teams can be more ready by driving to the known, because and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming driving to the known is a process you're sort of doing habitually. You're getting in the habit of doing it all the time. Is that right?
Yes. No, that's right. You're always trying to fill up that box on the right to pull things up and around to say, what do we know? What do we think? What do we know we don't know? And keep filling in putting the pieces of the puzzle, the jigsaw puzzle together.
Now, you mentioned a crisis register. Can you describe a crisis register and how that fits into this?
Sure. So what this organization, what they first did was actually for all of their crisis response, they created an online portal. And apologies to Craig, the lawyers hated this because everything they put in there was discoverable. And so, because what they wanted to capture was, what do we know? What do we think it means? What decisions are we making? And what actions are we taking? And they wanted to really formalize it globally, so they would have consistency. They put that all into a portal, and they could then go through a cycle of that, seal it up, which get pushed up the chain to the people, the bosses above would know what was going on. They would continually do it again, but they captured all of this. So after doing this for a couple of years, they realized that they actually now have this huge repository of knowledge. How do you help people tap into it, what has come before, in a hurry? They have a great structured process for the now, but how do you help them tap into what came before? And that's when they began to meta tag this stuff. So again, you're facing a catastrophic flood. Well, who's seen that before? I mean, again, it's a big enough company that they have seen pretty much anything. An airliner goes down, they've got people on it. Mm-hmm. When there's a major storm, Harvey, they had 1,500 families affected, and 200 of which were very seriously affected. And then you learn about what happens, that FEMA doesn't take care of you if you're an expat. Whoops, hadn't thought about that one. And pretty much, again, anything that happens in the world, I'm always calling them and saying, are your guys okay? Because it's big enough. So they figured if they actually began to put data tags on this stuff, they could help people tap into beyond the protocols, the procedures, and the indexes, the annexes of what you do when X happens, but what's the between the lines stuff, or what was the thing that surprised you, or how did you deal with morale of the staff, or those kind of things. You'd know who to go to. And so that was what they've done. I don't think they've quite finished it yet, but that's what they were most recently working on.
So is that something that, so if you're in the middle of a disaster, like Fat Allen had to work with a lot of people who they not only weren't Coast Guard, they weren't even government in the Katrina cleanup. So I'm thinking of Best Buy store managers. Can anybody who's at a sort of a point where they've got a major piece of the disaster response look at that crisis register, or is that primarily for the people who are coordinating everything?
It's internal, and it's the people who are coordinating things. Again, there is in this case, they've got a centralized health, safety, environment function, but then they also they try and push responsibility for these things out as close to the field as they can get it.
Sure.
It's like, in a way that in some senses, we'll get calls from alumni who will say, boy, I need to get a hold of somebody at FDA who knows how that places work. Who do you guys know? And we dig through the digital index cards and say, let me put you in touch with Jane Smith, who may not be the right person, but she can help you figure out who it is.
Okay,
how do
so you're playing a kind of an honest broker role too there in with the alumni.
Yeah, kind of a concierge.
Going forward, right? Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Or who's deployed to the latest Sonoma fire.
Yeah.
Well, if we will connect, because you all of a sudden get people from different agencies deploying. They don't know each other are there, and we say, we'll connect folks. But that's right now for us. It's a very manual, very cumbersome process.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we would love it. We tried at one point coming up with an app so people could say, yeah, I'm deploying to X, and then you'd be able to see a cluster of who are the other MPLIers who are also deploying to this, so you could find each other, and at least we'd have a warm welcome if you went and had to reach across a boundary.
So that would also be right, that would help people find each other, connect in real time. It would also give the hooking up the NPLIers means you both have a common frame of reference now.
Yeah.
And then that will,
a certain amount of trust.
Yeah, which speeds things up then, right? Yeah.
I mean, we have written up certain, we have what we call case histories that are available online on the website for certain incidents. So if you want to go back and see, so what were the leadership lessons out of the Iowa floods of 2008? We've got but it's a small subset of incidents, and they're very time consuming to do, and they don't get that much use. Sadly, I think we've done a good job of publicizing that there.
Well, I would like to ask you about that, because the one I've read that I thought was very useful, and actually is why we're doing this event, was the response to the Boston Marathon bombing. And if you can think of something we can do to push certain the awareness of certain case studies out there further, I think we could probably make more people aware of them, because there's some really good work there.
If you would include in the summary of this that you send out, and I'll give you the link to the page that has them all. I mean, all those cases are there, for anybody to download who wants them.
We'll do that.
Yeah, because I would like to see them get more use, because that would give us the incentive to go create more of them.
Yep. So, yeah, because it also sort of takes away the worry that there's a real problem at least there has been in the executive branch that I know anything about, which is through these events, which is lots of mid-level people mostly talking to each other, is that nobody really wants to do lessons learned, because somebody up the chain usually winds up getting embarrassed. If they've got broad shoulders, they can cope with that, and they're happy to do it because there's learning that occurs for everybody, and it's really important learning. But if they don't have broad shoulders, basically they suppress the lessons learned activity because they don't want to be embarrassed.
Yeah. No,
so this is a nice alternative to that.
Yeah. And I always say there's a difference between lessons identified, lessons applied, and lessons actually learned. So it changes how you're doing what you're doing going forward.
True.
And again, there tends to be an emphasis again on the operational piece, which is important. I don't want to discount it, but kind of what did we do? What will we do differently? And it doesn't get into as much of the human dynamics of how do we actually take care of each other in the middle of this, or what were I'll never forget we did a sort of a leadership after action review after the H1N1 with the CDC, and one of the people there talked about the challenge she faced, because she says, professional, I wanted to be in the EOC all the time. I wanted to be there. This was a major event, what we trained for. I want to be there to support my team. And I've got a 3-month-old baby at home. And so I was really torn between those two responsibilities. I really wanted to be home with my baby and taking care of my new child. And they, as the group sort of said, hey, we didn't think enough about how do we make sure the people who are working so hard in the EOC, we're relieving them in an appropriate way and thinking about what's their personal situation. So we can help take care of them, they can help take care of us, and we can make it a much more humane environment.
Mhm.
And there were a number of things like that. So,
Wow.
but yeah, there's again, it is tough. People don't want to see, but I always think, particularly with exercises and drills, if you didn't make a bunch of mistakes and the scenario wasn't tough enough, that's
Right.
the whole point is to not quite get it right and learn some stuff.
So are you seeing people doing more drills, practicing more?
I hate to say with a broad brush, yes or no, I think so, but that may be because the subset of people I talk to really believe in them, and doing it more. And also because people are being faced with more novel situations, social unrest, active shooter, all that stuff has sort of made people think, okay, what have we not drilled for? What have we not planned for yet that we might get hit with? But it's still it can be a very complicated and expensive process to go through, although I don't think it has to be. I think you can you can come up with the headlines, you can cull your scenarios out of the daily news and at least work through at a tabletop. Hey, what are the implications here? What are we ready for? Where are the gaps? What do we have to do differently?
Is a tabletop exercises that would be less expensive, right? Because you're not deploying people and material. How hard is it to run a tabletop exercise?
It can be not hard at all to very hard, depending on how complicated you want it to be and how if you want to simulate the emotional pressure and you've got a lot of injects and media components and things, which I think are really good to do. But I think if people see that as their only way in, then it's like, yeah, let's do it once a year because it costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. Whereas you could once a month sit around a conference table with everybody grab their lunch and come on in here. And what are we going to do if, X happens? Let's think about that. What might it mean? And what are we going to talk about? So you can do them pretty bare bones in a way, but there's a whole industry around making them and developing the scenarios and everything. And to do a really complex one is an art form.
So you could, I was looking at the bottom left quadrant again. You could almost have like a monthly brown bag and say, okay, we're just going to, everybody, like Jim, this is your month to bring a what if scenario.
Yeah.
We're going to chew on over lunch. Even if you just did that, so you got people sort of thinking a little bigger.
Right.
I think people be more forthcoming and honest in a practice situation than in a real situation. I mean, I think that would work well because people they're not risking quite as much to speculate or suggest things if it's not quite real. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, it does, and I think it is. Again, you don't have to look far to find what's the latest crisis that happens and what if it happens here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just keeping that top of mind and keeping people aware of the changing environment, what they need to be thinking about it is a good thing to do. And that doesn't cost, the brown bag lunch doesn't cost anybody anything. It costs you an hour at a time, but that's, everyone's going to have lunch anyway.
So Eric, who is, what sorts of people are you seeing in your cohorts right now?
We are seeing, well, we have about half the classes from the same agencies so we always get FEMA, CDC. We've begun to get some State Department folks. We get Northcom on a regular basis. We get the VA. And then we get Arlington Fire Department, Boston Police, Cambridge Police, Mass State Police come on a regular basis. We have some folks in the energy sector who tend to come on a fairly regular basis. And we're getting the Air Force, we're doing some more work with the Air Force these days. So in addition to Northcom, we have folks coming from other parts of the Air Force as well. So I mean, the way we're set up is no agency can send more than 3 people, unless you slip an extra $100 in the back of the application. No, but the idea is to have a multi-agency and also public, private, nonprofit, federal, state, and local, have a real mix of people get used to talking to each other and working together, do a project together. And so it's, there's always a bit of give and take with the funding, who's got money to spend or who doesn't. But
So that cross-fertilization pretty much happens every time, though, right?
yeah, no, it does.
That's fantastic.
That's part of the goal, is to
Yeah.
get, again, to figure out how other folks talk, what their concerns are, how their organizations work. And so, and there are, again, parts of the government in particular, you would never know what they do, or you might not know what they do if you're in one end of the government, and they're at the other end of the government. National Geospatial sends folks on a fairly regular basis, and National Counterterrorism Center. It's always good to have the intel community in the room.
Mhm.
So it's a good mix, a fun mix.
Is the Intel community usually in the room? Do they have a few analysts there?
They usually have a couple of analysts there, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Never the CIA, sadly, but it is, again, NCTC, ODNI is where we tend to get from. And, but because they are interested in building bridges and instead of working across government, they have to always work across the Intel community. So they're interested in that collaborative space.
Wow, that is just amazing. Do you all ever think about expanding beyond emergency management, or is that just not within your parameters?
We've got our hands full, I think. We've got, the principal program we've been doing now for 13 out of our 15 years. We just launched an emerging leaders program for a younger cohort, which just launched last March, and I'll have another cohort coming up. We are trying to figure out how we put together a second cohort of the MPLI executive program and run 2 a year. But there's all kinds of timing issues and things to make that happen, which is much more complicated than it should be.
Mm-hmm.
With that, and we think we'll be running our second master symposium, which is for alumni can come. That should be in late 2020. We'll be doing our second one of those. So we do a lot of custom programs. We do, for FEMA, we've been doing individual programs for them, just for them. For the Air Force, we've done some stuff. For TSA, we did quite a number of things.
Yeah.
And so,
well, Peter Neffinger, you mentioned him earlier. He sent a lot of TSA executives up there, right?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, we did five cohorts of SESers from TSA came through, and they've made a lot of change there. Peter's on our faculty now, so.
Oh, he is. Okay. So how do you, the emerging leaders cohort, when are you, at what point in their careers, or when are you hoping to snag people for that one?
GS 12-ish, sort of mid-career. They said moving into a leadership role. The first time we did it, I would say the age range was from like late 20s to late 40s. Mm-hmm. Again, because we were sort of picking and seeing who we could get from here, from there. The government shutdown did not help us.
Yeah.
So it interrupted the funding flow. But we had folks there from, again, public, private, nonprofit, and that was it was just a 1-week course. It was 4.5 days, and it was really fun. They really dove into it and were very eager learners.
So then the Masters Symposium for the alumni will present an opportunity for those people and the older people to interact. And
yeah, and that one, I think we're going, so we tend to sort of narrow the theme there. It's only a day and a half.
Mm-hmm.
and we'd like to hear both have alumni teach in that so they can share with us what they've done, what they've been working on. But I also think that for this time around, we're going to be looking at ethical decision making, which is something we teach one small piece of in one program, but they have a much broader and deeper discussion about how do you follow your moral compass in difficult times? How do you align your beliefs with the organization's beliefs and still be able to sleep at night? And so I think that's what we're going to talk about. That's one of the topics under consideration.
Okay, what I'm curious now, and we don't have as many people on this call as I expected to have, but we are going to put this out, of course, on the website and to the mailing list. Is there anything else that this group could do for you, or for the program, or for you?
You know anybody who might be, our December cohort's sold out, but if you know anybody who'd be good for the program, we'll always love to have recommendations for candidates to come into the program. But it's also good. I appreciate the feedback here on what I shared with you today. It's great to have a place to come and get some of that, because it is hard sometimes to just throw something out there and say, hey, this might be crazy, but what do you think? Oh, I like this. No, I don't like that. Or you should ask these questions. That's all really good for us to hear and good feedback to get. And we, it's,
Okay.
I like the structure of what you've done here. And I think that might be nice to be able to share that. And I will say, the last guest you had last time around was really interesting stuff. So I actually appreciated being able to tap in and read some of that cross-boundary leadership material.
That Adrian Wolfberg.
Adrian Wolfberg, yeah, was
Yeah.
really interesting. So I just like the fact that you're surfacing interesting people who are doing interesting things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just so you know, we're going to be doing a quarterly session. So the next one will be December 3rd. I haven't put the invite out for it, and that one will be in the evening because he can't do it from Defense Intelligence Agency. He has to be home to do it. So we're gonna start doing them in the evening, and I would offer you the same. I'm sure you don't need another quarterly obligation, but if you want to come back and ask more questions like that, this is representative of the kinds of people who show up for this. And we've been doing it in dinners in the room in DC since 2003. This
Right.
isn't, sadly, I haven't been able to make that work this year, although it's going to, I think, start working again next year. But so this is an accessible way to do that, and just let me know if you want to do it again sometime.
Okay.
Anybody, we're at a minute away. Does anybody want to ask or tell Eric anything before we stop at half past?
I don't know exactly what I'm thinking about it, but I just, when you talk about managers asking for input and seeking advice from other people in the organization, which is, of course, is a great thing, and they should do that. It's in my experience, it's oftentimes when people ask for advice or input, they're paying lip service to it, and they don't really want it. They really just want you to validate what they were planning to do, and I think that's a caution about that. That just everything you talked about, everybody sounded so well-meaning and benevolent, and I guess people can do what I just said and still be benevolent and well-meaning. But I just find that a lot of times people go through the motions of doing all these things, but they, on some level, don't get it, or they're too defensive, or for whatever reason, they really, are not going to be supportive if you suggest something they don't want to do. And I don't know how you combat that, but that kept coming up in the back of my mind when you were talking about all these things. Maybe it's just me.
I think what you say is very true, and I wish I had a better answer. So how do you open people up to that, aside from having worked for or with someone who has that more of a growth mindset of really wanting to hear what you think?
Mm-hmm.
That to me I've seen has been the best catalyst to that, is if you work for Peter Neffinger or Thad Allen or any one of these other people who truly think that way. You're right. I wish I had a way to train people that way, but I don't.
Yeah, I think some people have more confidence in there, and they really see the success of people under them as reflecting well on them.
Yeah,
and those are the kind of people you want to work for if you possibly can.
absolutely.
Well, and that's interesting you mentioned that, Craig, because where it took me immediately was to the employee viewpoint survey, which is it is really a great source of information, and don't bother doing anything with the results unless you walk the talk inside the agency.
Oh, and there is now that movement. I think very, very hard to do, but the sort of radical candor movement, which Netflix has done, and where you are, and there's an investment firm that has done it. I forgot, the guy was on 60 Minutes. I'm trying to remember his name. He sort of pioneered this, where it is the expectation, and it's an enforced expectation that you will say what you mean and mean what you say, and put it out. You don't put it out there to get pats on the back. You put it out there to get real feedback.
Yeah.
And
There must be
I think it sounds great in the abstract, but actually talking about it and saying, you know what, I think that's a horrible looking shirt. You know, it's a tough kind of environment to live in, right? You know, we're not used to it.
Yeah, I think some of it has to do with just some individuals, just through their growing up, they became more like the kind of people that can do that. I mean, I'm not sure it can be taught very quickly. I think it's some people just had to be innate about sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric. And okay, so we'll talk, and I'll make sure I get those links from you before I do a recap.
Okay.
If you happen to think of whoever the guy is that's doing radical candor, my head went to Susan Scott, but I'd like to know who this guy is.
Yeah, I'll think of the guy on the investment firm, and then it's Patty from Netflix.
Okay.
Patty. I interviewed her even. I'll think of her name and send it to you. But she's got one of the most popular TED Talks in the last couple of years, and
that'd be great.
And she wrote a book, and they have you can find online the Netflix Culture Deck, which is the onboarding tool they use.
Oh.
And it's an evolving set of PowerPoint slides, but it's up there.
Okay.
You really do set an expectation that we are all here to make this place better and succeed, and therefore we've got to be really honest about what we feel, what we see, what we believe, and if you can't survive there, you wash out pretty fast.
Fantastic. Boy, this has been great. Eric, thank you so much for your time. And Jim and Craig and Jim, you guys are just the best, and I really was very happy that you could come. So we'll see you all, and we'll be in touch. All right.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right.